Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to day 2 of the Open Government Partnership Summit 2013. It's really good to have everybody back here today. I thought yesterday was a truly remarkable day, such energy in the building. We had some great content and discussions, plenty of opportunities to connect and network. And I think it was a day that left the OGP stronger as a movement. Yesterday we had Raghi Omar as your host. Today that job falls to me in the morning. My name is Paul Maltby. I'm the Director of Open Data and Government Innovation in the Cabinet Office here in the UK government. I lead the team that runs the OGP work, and it's my team that's put on this event for you this week. I'm looking forward to another wonderful day today. We've got more of our fabulous bright spots. We've got the launch of the IRM reports. And we've got, of course, more top quality parallel sessions and festival content on the 3rd floor and the 5th floor. A couple of pieces of housekeeping. Please, can you turn down the volume on your mobile devices? But please, please don't turn them off. Please keep tweeting using the hashtag OGP13, a hashtag that was trending on Twitter in the UK yesterday, and I'd love to see that happen again today. For simultaneous translation, the channels are 1 for English, 2 for Spanish, 3 for French, 4 for Arabic, and 5 for Russian. For evacuation, in the unlikely event of an emergency, you'll hear a sound, alarm sound, followed by an announcement over the public address system. So please make sure you know where the nearest fire exits are, and if the alarm sounds, please follow the instructions and leave via the nearest exit. The assembly point is at the column over the road at the front of the conference centre. Okay, so let's get down to business. This morning I'm delighted to introduce the next of our bright spots, Vivian Suete Cortez from the Philippines.
Good morning. It's nice to see friendly faces. In the Philippines, the Commission on Audit has less than 7,000 state auditors looking into transactions of more than 161,000 government units. Added to this is their responsibility to make sure that government funds are well accounted for to the Filipino people. The magnitude and amount of daily transactions that they have to examine has made public audit a very, very overwhelming task. Just recently, and probably some of you have heard, that millions of Filipinos got angry because of the misuse and abuse of the government's Priority Development Assistance Fund. But what I would like to point out is that central to this was the Commission on Audit report that highlighted weak accountability mechanisms that led to projects that were faulty, incomplete, or not delivered at all. So that is how a usual state auditor looks like, with a tons of documents she has to examine. So how do we help the government try to address problems like this? Well, we created the Citizen Participatory Audit Project. We call it the CPA for short. Now, the CPA tries to bring together government and citizens to work together so that they can look at projects, examine it, and see whether or not a project has really reached the goal. Now, CPA also makes citizens like you or me participate in joint audits, surveys, scorecards, or you can also submit audit-related feedback as an individual. So this is the front page of the COA report on the Priority Development Assistance Fund. And then this is an example of how a citizen, an ordinary citizen, can participate in a joint audit, or the CPA. Now, how did we start doing this? We started by talking and engaging with the Commission on Audit, and then we approached civil society organizations who were actually willing to engage with government. Next, we were able to draft a joint operational guidelines to make sure that rules, regulations, and laws were actually understood by all. Because that was the beginning of how we wanted to build trust between citizens and government. Getting to know you sessions were also very important, because that was one way, again, of building engagement, of continuing the dialogue. We needed to understand how government, or how the Commission on Audit operates, and the Commission on Audit also needed to understand how civil society operates. We had to keep that dialogue going on. Now, in all these, I would always like to emphasize the importance of citizens and government working together. So, but at this point, I would want to tell you that the process was not easy. It wasn't easy at all. Each step, and I think you could imagine this, was fraught with challenges, and it tested the team spirit. Sometimes we felt that we just had to give up. But you know, that's the great thing about constructive engagement. We were not alone, as I am not alone here right now, because I am with the Commission on Audit in this. So, and together we actually learned that reforms happen when two naturally opposing parties would come together and work together to form concrete solutions. And I think that was our bright spot. And the open government partnership was also very instrumental, because in due time, the Citizen Participatory Audit Project was now one of the Philippine government's commitments to ensure that there would be increased transparency, accountability, and citizen participation. Now, I would like to point out 3 things where we think that CPA has made a difference or can continue to make a difference. First, citizen participatory audits promote constructive and collaborative partnerships between citizens and the state. You don't have to be an auditor, a lawyer, an engineer to participate. You don't even have to love math. And math doesn't love me, but I work with them. Because the wonderful, and I have to emphasize, is the wonderful thing about CPAs is how you as a citizen can find ways to work with government. So as long as you have the time, the energy and commitment, you're always welcome with open arms. The next thing I would like to point out is that CPA promotes social accountability. After auditing health centers in one of the cities in the Philippines, we have learned that thousands of conditional cash transfer beneficiaries are now enjoying better access to healthcare services. Doctors and nurses are more responsive, more medicines are available, and health facilities are cleaner, all because they decided to participate during the community scorecard process, which was also part of the CPA project. Now, the third point is that CPA helps close the loop. Feedback is very important. Transparency is very important. But the most important thing is how government manages expectations and responds to the needs, the issues and concerns brought forward by citizens. Okay. There, you would see an example of how things are in the Philippines in the health centers. And this is where I want to point your attention to. And this is an example of how we start closing the loop. We have a website, and it's called icuenta.com. In English, it translates to I, account. Because we want to keep asking government to hold themselves accountable. But at the same time, as citizens, it's also our duty to let the government know what we think so they can act on it. So through this website, we hope to encourage more citizens to be able to submit audit-related feedback for the Commission on Audit to act upon. The next few months would be a challenge for us, because that's when we aim to institutionalize citizen participatory audit and, of course, broaden civil society engagement. Because we hope that in the next few years, participatory audits will just become the norm, not the exception. So as I close my sharing with you, I would like to point out that we believe that CPA, or the Citizen Participatory Audit Project, can strengthen institutions and can help government transform lives, like that of a happy child. And I, together with my Commission on Audit counterparts and our local CSO organizations, believe that we can all do this, one audit at a time. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Another inspiring story about open government in action. Next up, we have the next bright spot, Georgi Klidiashvili from Georgia.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I come from the country which is known for its hospitality, and the people in Georgia are very friendly to foreigners. This is how Georgians are happy. And maybe because of this happiness, we are under constant invasion from the great powers. And even today, part of the Georgia is occupied. Georgia also has a big legacy of secrecy and totalitarian regime. And this is what secrecy brings. This is the document recently opened from the archives of Georgia, former KGB archives. And this is the resolution of the Troika session sentencing one of the most famous Georgian writers to death. And this is what secrecy brings. Georgia is a country where civil society is just developing. This is the country which is struggling with its legacy of secrecy. And OGP was the real platform where civil society could advocate for more transparency, accountability, and openness. Freedom of information started in Sweden, and this is the guy who did it, 1766. And we owe a lot to him. Maybe one of the reasons why we are here is because of him, so respect to him. Georgia joined the family of freedom of information in 1999, when freedom of information legislation was passed in Georgia. But a lot has changed after that. And freedom of information has to be developed in my country. And this was the main topic that civil society of Georgia has focused on. And inspirational practices of different developed democracies, different open societies, were the issue that we have advocated for. 4 years ago, when a group of historians started an organization working on freedom of information in Georgia, we had very modest goals. We had the inspiration of our partners from the National Security Archive at George Washington University. I would like them to be in here to once again say my gratitude to them. And we had very modest goals, as I said. We wanted to participate in little changes that would lead to better openness of information, access to information, and open society. And now I have this great honor, great pleasure to stand in front of the whole OGP community, presenting the achievements that we, the small group working on it, had very significant participation in. What has changed after Georgia's participation in OGP? What is the bright spot that I would like to speak about? This is the proactive disclosure of information. We worked closely with the government on drafting action plan. It's not always easy to work with the governments. You probably understand this, but it was a brilliant group that we worked together. And what have we achieved? Access to information was quite limited when we started 4 years ago. Only 50% of FOIA requests that we have submitted had answers. Our recommendations were not that much considered in the beginning. But last month, when we had the presentation of our report, the whole government attended. Prime Minister was taking our recommendations. So this is the change. Starting from September 2012, government is obliged to proactively publish information, which is socially important. This is expenses, administrative expenses, budget transparency, legal acts, and various of information. And this leads straight toward the public participation. This enables citizens to proactively control the government. Yesterday, Prime Minister Cameron mentioned that openness should be the high priority. Openness is good for everyone. This is one of the slogans of the OGP. And this is the legal act that was just recently passed. This is the decree of the government of Georgia, obliging government institutions to proactively publish information. And this is the achievement. We know that openness, transparency, and accountability leads toward, this is the path towards democracy. Without openness, we cannot achieve any standard of democracy, and we know it very well. But this is just the beginning. With the support of the OGP community, we achieved quite high standards of access to information. But there is much to do. We have to deliver it to the final beneficiaries, to the citizens. What is the benefits of proactively disclosure of information? So much has to be done. But maybe what I have told you now is not new for the countries who have gone through this. We have combated and overstepped the legacy of secrecy in Georgia. This might be inspirational practice, example, to those who are starting their fight against secrecy, against closed regimes, who are starting their civil activities. And we did it in Georgia. We started, we advocated, we worked with the government, and we did it. So this is doable. Further development of democracy, fighting against secrecy, openness, this is the future steps that has to be done, not only in Georgia, but in the whole world. Thank you.
Thank you, Georgi, for that wonderful presentation there. Now we have the first of our panel sessions in the day. I'd like to introduce the panel onto the stage to talk about the independent reporting mechanism. First up, we have Yuli Ismatono, who's the Deputy Editor-in-Chief from Tempo. We have the Right Honourable Francis Maud MP, Minister for the Cabinet Office and Paymaster General. We have Yanda Delodlo, the Deputy Minister for Public Service and Administration in the Republic of South Africa. Dr. Rosemary McGee from the Institute of Development Studies in the UK. And Alejandro Gonzalez, the co-founder and CEO of GSOC. And finally, I'd like to introduce Dr. Mo Ibrahim, the founder and chair of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, to make the opening remarks in this session. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's wonderful to see you in the morning here. And I wish to start by really thanking the British government for a wonderful event here. Great venue and wonderful food and drinks, good organization. That's really nice and great presentations. But then what? Where is the beef really? What are we delivering here at the end? Really, what matters at the end here is the commitments made by each country. Each country, the member country, make some commitments of their own choice, what they're going to do over the next couple of years. And then there is the interim report mechanism, which appoint local researchers in these countries to really validate and comment on what happened, holding the countries accountable to their own commitments. And then these reports are published, and we are very proud to say that the IRM is publishing today the first 8 reports on the first 8 countries. That is the beef. It's nice to see everybody and nice to have this wonderful atmosphere, but at the end really is what each country is doing to ensure open government and to develop that. And these are the commitments, and that is the reports on these commitments to see really if they delivered or not. It's about delivery. And that's what we need to focus on. And these reports, I hope, are popularized and spread around. We need to spread the word. We need civil society to get involved in that, to really see what the governments are doing concerning their commitments. So the support of this IRM is very important, because at the end, that is the delivery mechanism for our group here. We have 60 or 61 countries now. We definitely need more countries to join us. And I'm really puzzled. I mean, where is France? Where is Germany? Where is Japan? Those guys don't believe in open government or what? Are we having conversation with them? Or is it just because it's not invented here, or it is an Anglo-Saxon conspiracy? I don't understand. We really need to have conversation with our friend in the continent, because they have a place here and they should be here. The second remark I want to make is business. Where is business? Business is a major stakeholder in our society here, and they should be here in the room with us. And I don't see any engagement from the business people. And then we need to start to talk to those guys as well, because business must be informed. Funding, I said something about funding yesterday, but really governments need to fulfill their commitments on funding. And it's not much money. And I mentioned yesterday, civil society funded over $4 million already. Governments, all these governments, 61 governments, maybe half of the world GDP, funded $1.6 million. It's ridiculous. So we really need to ensure that the governments really commit and they fulfill the commitment. Why you need that? Because the major expense you have actually in the future will be the researchers we need to hire in each local countries to really comment on the government's performance vis-a-vis their own commitments and produce these reports. And these reports have to be quality reports because that is the credibility of what we're doing. So we need to produce really high quality reports. And I invite you to read the 8 reports which has been produced and to see what sort of quality is being. I'm very satisfied with what has been done. We have some remarks, but maybe we can discuss it there about how the government commented on this report, etc., and how to improve what you're doing. The IRM also have what they call senior advisors. I'm one of them. Actually, I'm the only one left, I guess, because unfortunately, Graça Machel is really busy because of Mandela. She couldn't come. Mary Robinson got involved in the Great Lake as UN representative, the issues in Congo. So I had a word with the incoming chairman, the Indonesian deputy minister, and I think both the IRM and the steering committee need to sit together to really appoint more advisors. The role of the advisor really here is to provide political cover and support for the independent review mechanism, because this independent reporting mechanism must be independent and must have teeth. Otherwise, there is no point. We just save our time and save our money and go home. That is the beef to be delivered. So this report must be really tough and correct. So that is something really we have to work on. Finally, I would like just to make 1 or 2 remarks about also civil society, and I'm a member of the civil society, but I'm just comment on the issue of activism. There must be some evolution in our work as civil society. The notion of activism, what is activism actually? So this really should not be reduced to anti-government campaigns, or even to be just focused on holding the governments accountable. Yeah, that's fine. But it's really the dialogue, the involvement, the conversation we need to have between civil society and government. And this is a delicate balance we need to be aware of. I say that because we have this strange experience in Africa. In a number of occasions, I remember one conversation I had with an African president. I was complaining about the clampdown on civil society in his country. And among what he said, you know what, really, this is not civil society. I said, why? He said, no, this actually is my opposition, the political parties trying to fight us here, and they come as an NGO so that they can. And I said, look, clearly there's not a political space for your opposition. That's why people are pushed to work through the NGO. But that also can be damaging, because NGO is not an opposition party. People need to go into politics in the opposition, they need to form their own parties. But NGO is there to really do what we should do. You know, civil society is not anti-government, is not pro-government. No, it's pro-people. And we need to have this honest dialogue. If the government does something wrong, we need to be the first to stand up and say, you guys have done something bad here. But if there's something to do, we need to support that. So we need some evolution, this concept of activism. We are partners. Together, hopefully, we move the society. We had the same problem in our foundation. You know, we published the governance report about Africa. We measure performance of every country in Africa. At the beginning, people would say, thought the government's language body was, those guys, who are those guys to hold us accountable? You know, who are you? What exactly your agenda? Over time, people realize that we are not really anti-government. We're trying to help by holding government accountable, by showing what works and what doesn't work. Increasingly, government now became very supportive. I mean, in the last months, I met maybe 4 African presidents, The first thing you do now is to open the index and discuss seriously the performances in the country. And that is really encouraging. So it's just we need to really build that grand alliance between the civil society, business, and government to really see what it works and to open this box called governance in order for all us to really reap some benefits from there. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Question answer time. So I will address my first question to Minister Mo. Can you explain the importance of the IRM that we've been hearing about to the UK chairmanship of the OGP?
Well, I think the IRM's been incredibly important to the whole credibility and remains crucial to the credibility of the OGP. I mean, this is an incredibly important movement. It's powerful. There's a huge kind of growing momentum behind it. The risks around it, I would say, are very much around skepticism and cynicism. Those who look at a government which, I mean, the accusation is of sort of open wash. You claim to be open and you give yourself a tick and scratch yourself on the back and think you're brilliant. And I think the key point about the independent reporting mechanism is that it holds us to account. You don't just get to mark your own homework. I think it's always been essential to the OGP that every member government starts from a different place. That each one of them has a kind of different mix of pre-existing conditions and cultural constraints and different origins, and there are some minimum conditions that have to be met to join, but then it's all about the journey. It's all about the direction of travel, an action plan that shows you're really going to go further, more transparent, more openness, more accountability, and so on. And the independent reporting mechanism is crucial to it. And it's tough. And it's going to be tough for governments. For Ayanda and myself as two of the governments which have been through this mill first, there are some tough messages for us. We both think we're governments that have got a pretty good record in this territory, but you know, we're not allowed to get away with what may have been defects. And the independent reporting mechanism on the report on the UK said very clearly, said your first action plan, you didn't really consult with civil society at all. And that was bang to rights, actually. It's fair cop. Second one, and we took that on board, and the second one we did. We engaged very thoroughly, probably not as much as we could have done. They said that you were much too focused on open data. I apologise a bit less for that, actually, because I think open data is crucial to this. And so I think, you know, criticisms and take it on the chin. And I think we need to be confident enough to submit ourselves very openly to the scrutiny, and then argue our case, accept it where we think the criticism's fair, argue our case, but again, do it very, very openly. It's kind of in the nature.
Good enough. Alejandro, is the IRMF giving OGP real teeth, or is the jury still out on that?
Yeah, that's a quite good question. But, you know, OGP, like any MSI initiative, is all about having the right carrots and having the right sticks. And we in civil society, as you know, we love the sticks, isn't it? So we better make sure that this is the right stick. Not going so far, but the right one that we need. For this to happen, we need to be careful on two levels. One, having the right rules of the game. 2 consecutive IRM bad reports, and then a country might be kicked out from OGP. The thing is, for instance, what constitutes a bad report? We have to clarify that one in order for us to be sure what the rules of the games are. Second thing, in order to have a bite, we should not disregard the local level, the national dynamics. What had to happen there? That's quite important. IRM report should be more about catalyzing local debate, local stakes, rather than global stakes. So for that to happen, it's very important for the IRM process to be involving all the key stakeholders at national level. Having, being so engaging with civil society, it's important at local level. In the case of Mexico, that happened. And it's very interesting how, at the end of the day, this came out. And we should speak more about that.
Okay. Mo, what do you think? Is the IRMF giving real teeth to the OGP?
It should, actually. I think the jury is still out. I think we performed reasonably well on the first 8 reports. We need to really strengthen our resources. I said that's important. We need that political cover. It's very important. We need those senior advisors. They don't cost money. We are not paid. Even our expenses, we pay from our pockets. So there's no cost. But we need to get some senior people from Asia, from South America, from Europe, because that will be important to really provide that advisory and political cover, again, I say, for the guys who are writing the reports. So when, big guys like Francis here have a go at our reporters, they need some protection and some pushback.
I'm a pussycat.
Well, don't tell me that. So that is something really we need to, I think, yes, we are growing our teeth.
Good. Minister Delodlo, may I ask you, what lessons, if any, did you learn from the IRM in your country, and how can governments make the most out of these reports?
I think the biggest lesson that we learned is that the IRM has the potential to have teeth. And I think in having teeth, there's a few things that we need to put in place, there are certain fundamentals that we need to observe for the IRM to be as credible as we all want it to be. Alexandra spoke about the stakeholders involved here, and one of the biggest stakeholders is government itself. So that as the IRM does its work, it needs to consult with government. As they prepare their report, they need to verify some of the information with government, because at the end of the day, Francis and I are only envoys of our respective heads of state in the OGP. And the heads of state are the ones that are actually accountable for the implementation, ultimately, of the country action plans. So if they're not taken on board and in confidence in the development of the final reports, that's a little bit of a gray area where they should be held, as I said, if the IRM is to be as effective, it has to have the teeth that allow for presidents and heads of government to be able to interact with the report and also to be able to interact with the IRM process itself. So for me, that was the weakest point of the IRM, in that it concentrated, the process concentrated largely on interaction with other role players, but the ultimate role player, being the head of state, was not involved in this process. And I think this is something that, because it's a new organization, the OGP is a new organization, its mechanisms and processes are new as well. As we move along, we will learn and we will strengthen the hand of the IRM mechanism.
Thank you. Rosie, I think the next question is for you. From your experience of accountability in other international initiatives, what pitfalls does the OGP need to avoid when it comes to holding governments accountable? And how do we make sure we reach a wide audience?
So on the pitfalls, I think the first most important pitfall is related to who owns the OGP. Lots of us in the room have probably had experience of international initiatives about accountability or governance, where the ownership sits largely with the global north and largely with governments, rather than with civil society actors. The OGP explicitly broke with that mold in forming this initiative as a partnership between actors in global north and global south, and actors in government and in civil society, indeed representing the concerns of citizens. So I think there's a tendency for all of us to maybe sometimes operate in default mode that we're used to from past processes, and to have to stop and remind ourselves at every point, in terms of content and in terms of every step of process, that this is a partnership and it's not an initiative that takes the shape of lots of aid-funded initiatives where the donor countries are in a much more powerful position than the aid recipient countries, and it's not an initiative where government is running the show and civil society are being invited into government space opinions on things. We happen to constantly remind ourselves within the IRM mechanism on that, and indeed some issues came up about this at the steering committee the other day, Tuesday of this week, which have left us with food for thought that we now need to think about and work out how we really do incorporate that principle of joint ownership into every aspect of the independent review the independent reporting mechanism and the OGP as a whole. Another big pitfall that we've needed to be careful of and will continue to be careful of is the fact that in the independent reporting mechanism, we have to look not just at the fulfillment of action plans, which is about kind of content of each country's action plan, but also at the process of engagement between civil society actors and government in the formulation of that action plan and in its implementation. And this raises a very tricky issue about how do you assess the nature and the quality of citizen engagement, which is something that lots of us have suffered lots of headaches about over the years. It's a very hard thing to pin down. It relates to the ownership issue because, as Minister Maud mentioned, every country is having to develop their own action plan, starting from where they're starting at. And the governance context in these countries, the histories behind relationships between government and civil society are very diverse. So what might be considered ambitious or satisfactory in one case might not be in another. And when we go about assessing the extent of engagement and the quality of the engagement, we really have to take that into account. That's where our national researchers are absolutely critical. It's only really a national researcher with a lot of expertise and experience in looking at these issues within their own country context that can provide useful and a fair perspective on these things. I think I would say the third big pitfall is to do with the fact that the action plan is obviously only a part of the picture. The action plan captures the things that were, well, especially for this first round of countries, the things that were considered important and priority 2 years ago when they produced them. And as Minister Maud said, there are countries which will readily admit they didn't go through a very extensive consultative or participatory or engaged process to produce this first round of action plans. So the action plan is only part of the picture, and the national researcher might do a very good job on assessing very minutely the degree of fulfillment of each of the commitments in the action plan, but there's also the context that's going on in the country as the backdrop to the action plan. And I think we all need to remember, while it's our job as the IRM to assess fulfillment of the action plans and the process through which they were carried out, we all need to bear in mind as well that open government is a whole load of things that maybe are not all captured within the action plan, and where there are aspects of the context which are pulling in contradictory directions or conflicting directions with some of the key principles of the OGP, some of the eligibility criteria, some of the core values of the OGP, that's relevant as well. And we do have a space in the reports for capturing that, which has been used in some of these cases in the first round. It's a very relevant part of the whole picture that we need to take into account in order to work out, so what? If the action plan was fully complied with, so what? If there were other things going on in the context that went in a contrary spirit to that, then that matters too.
Mo, what do you think are the pitfalls, and how do we need to make sure that this reaches a wide audience?
Right, two questions here. I think we need to improve a little bit on the way we're doing things. I'm not convinced that we are allowing governments enough time to comment. And I noticed that, I hope people understand, I mean, the researchers do the report, they submit it to the government to comment on it, and then that is taken into account, and people can accept the comment or not, but it's a comment by the government, and of course also involves civil society views on this. We noticed that most of the government asked for extensions. And the dilemma for the IRM was this country wants 1 week, this country wants 1 month, and we have deadlines and how to deal with that. Who has the authority to say, okay, everybody have 1 week, or I think clearly probably governments need a little bit more time to respond, and that should be maybe taken into account. And maybe that answers the issue my sister here raised about the involvement of head of state, because I guess if you have only 1 week to comment, you wouldn't have much chance maybe of discussing this with the head of state. But by extending that, that will give you the opportunity to do that. Because we cannot interact with heads of state, because each government appointed a ministry to deal with us, and that's our point of contact. So it is lying within your ministry then to deal with the leadership of the country. So that's one point. It's it. One thing I did not like actually was the length of some comments from governments. Some country produced 200 pages of comment. I mean, this is ridiculous. If you want to make a point, you cannot make it in 2 or 3 pages. Then you don't have a point. You're just, fluffing it to hope people fall asleep before reading the report or whatever. And that is not helpful. The reports themselves also, and we also need to self-criticize ourselves, some of our reports are actually too long. We really need to be very precise to the point. That leads to the ease of communication. If we need to communicate with people, if the reports are slim and simple to the point, more people will read them. And so that is something really we need to, so both sides have to improve what they're doing. As individuals involved here and as civil society groups, we have our networks, we have our contacts, etc. We encourage people to really write, to communicate. I was very glad the FT accepted an obit, published an obit I wrote about this today. So I did my little bit there. So please buy the FT to thank them, But there's a lot of really capable people around here. You need to write, do TV interviews, blog. We need citizens to know there is something now which we are all working together in order to improve our lives. So we need really to push there, and you have a role to play. Yeah.
Guilty.
Yeah.
All right, we'll do.
Okay.
I'll take your message. But let me ask the representatives of governments, Minister Delodlo and Minister Maud, are the governments taking this report seriously? If so, why? And if not, why not?
Okay, fair question. Are we taking it seriously? Yes. I mean, we're kind of obliged to. Both of us are founding members of the OGP. We were in the first 8 member governments, and we've got a real responsibility to show that we're taking it seriously. And I mean, I just think to pick up some of the other points. I think the point Rosemary made about, should this just be looking at the implementation of the action plan, or should it be looking at other things which are relevant to this? I think that's a really fair point, actually, because you could imagine a position where a government had faithfully implemented the specific commitments in the action plan, but at the same time was doing things which were suppressing or inhibiting civil society and a free media, and in which case one of the effects of that is to make the reporting, the role of civil society in the reporting mechanism less free, by definition. So I think that's a really good point. I think Mo's point absolutely about being short and sharp and crisp and clear is absolutely right. The other point I think it's important to make is because this, I think unusually in the OGP we've created a dynamic which is not kind of an adversarial one between civil society and governments. It is a partnership, and as I said yesterday, governments are not monolithic. There are reformers within government and there are resistors within government, and one of the things that OGP absolutely enables is civil society to form kind of alliances, particularly with reformers, to support the work of reformers in government, which is often, sometimes a bit beleaguered and lonely. And so that's really, it's really important that and it's a delicate thing, that sense of crispness, not fudging issues, but showing that actually where governments do what they've said they're going to do and do make progress, they're given proper credit for it, because otherwise it's so easy for the resistors in government to say, told you, they're never going to be satisfied, we'll do all this stuff, and then it's never enough, and we just need to be kind of clear about let's recognize the successes while not kind of soft-pedaling on the future.
Minister Jalodlo, would you agree?
I sense some support from over there on that one. I expect that was one of my government colleagues.
Well, it's support from a minister from another country, so it's government supporting one another. I think Francis is right. It's a mechanism that we have developed in the OGP. There is no ways we can undermine its existence. All we have to do is to really support the work of the IRM, because we might get too cozy and comfortable with one another between civil society and governments. And this is the one verifying body that is outside the relationship between the two that will be able to assist us to determine whether we're pulling in the right direction. And I think the most important thing that Mo has said as an eminent person in the IRM is the relationship between civil society and governments, and the activism need not be activism that is unnecessarily adversarial, bordering on opposition more than activism. And I think that's what we all need to learn, because if that is the case, it pulls us apart and we'll be unable to work. But if you have a person or the likes of Mo being part of the IRM, it makes it so much more easy for us that we also feel comfortable as governments that there is that fairness within the IRM.
Alejandro, I think this question, following up on the minister's answers, when civil society is working so closely with the government on the AGP, how can they play a real monitoring role in holding governments to account? How does this work in Mexico?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, because, you know, OGP is so demanding for civil society, because we have to play an international role, a national role, a collaboration role, you know, and a critical role as well.
Yes.
So that's kind of schizophrenic. And it's not easy. In the Mexican case, for instance, the only way that we have been able to play that multiple roles is having a strong coalition of civil society organizations within OGP and without OGP. That's quite important, because when you are within OGP, the regional organizations that created OGP in Mexico were 8, only 8. Fortunately, in Mexico, NGOs are way beyond those 8 CSOs. We are, you know, in a constant dialogue with the government, but also in a constant dialogue with the other civil society organizations that are, many of them are critical towards OGP. And having a real good, strong, united coalition within OGP and having good relations with other civil society organizations that go beyond OGP is key. If you don't have that, it is not easy to perform all those kind of roles.
Thank you. I think we have very little time left, but one last question from Rosie, I believe. Based on the first reports, do you get the sense that the OGP is making a difference in the 8 founding countries?
I think the answer is a qualified yes. To talk a bit from the perspective of doing the research, there have been, for us as well, this has been the first round of doing the independent reporting, so it's been a learning process for all of us. In some ways, I mean, we've got to the point that we're at today where 8 reports have been produced of a very good quality, and I think that deserves, you know, huge congratulations for the 8 researchers in the first 8 countries, for the IRM support unit that has supported all of us extremely well in this really, really challenging and time-pressed endeavour, which has been the first round of the IRM's operations. And I've met now with a lot of the other the researchers on the next round of IRM countries, because lots of them are here at the event. And it's a great, enthusiastic, rigorous group of researchers, and I think that they'll be doing a really good job. They've had difficulties in the first round particularly, largely because the quality of what we can do as the IRM and what each researcher can do as the national researcher depends very much on how the OGP process has been approached within the country. And in many cases, perhaps because it was new and it was the first time for everybody, the researcher who's working on a very, very small number of days, because that's all that the IRM could afford to pay for them. And there'll be, you know, well, I mean, one researcher for a country the size of Brazil or Mexico or is a very, very challenging task in itself. They're working with very little time to cover a very complex set of issues and set of relationships and processes. And to do the job well within the parameters that they're working within, they really need there to be a good network already kind of established, a good process already in train that they can then go and review and watch. And that hasn't been the case in all of this first round of countries. So we're very much hoping that next time round that will be more in place in the first 8 countries, and that the second round of 35 countries will have kind of had more time to put those things in place so that the research process can do a really, really good job despite those limitations. In terms of whether the OGP is making a difference in the first 8 countries, yes, I said a qualified yes. Here, we've tried to produce the reports in a way which is readable, usable. It's right that some of them are quite long, but actually even the longest of the reports is only allowing 1.5 pages per commitment. It was for a country that just had a lot of commitments, and we have to look commitment by commitment. There's also a very short kind of at-a-glance type executive summary that enables people to get a good impression within a few pages of how each country is doing. And when you look across them, you see that actually there are a lot of commitments that aren't fulfilled in this first 2-year period for the action plan. And there are lots of commitments which are kind of in train, but there might only be limited progress made on them, in some cases substantial progress made on them. That varies a great deal between the countries. And the other issue, which doesn't get much kind of showing in those short executive summaries, is some of these issues of the backdrop to the action plan. And I think it's really important to remember, you know, a country might have lots and lots of commitments about open data, for example, but open data, while it might be very important, is not the whole picture of open government. And technologies are not here as an end in themselves, but as a means to the bigger end of open government, which is all about governments which are more accountable to their citizens. And I think it's very important not to lose sight of that. Sometimes in trying to produce succinct reports, there's a danger of kind of leaving that to the edge of the picture. So I think the message for the first 8 countries is kind of, well, from the IRM's perspective, 2 cheers or maybe 2.5 cheers, perhaps not quite 3 cheers yet. And keep at it.
All right. Before we wrap up, I believe Mo has a 10-second message. Is that right?
That's all. I think it will be best of us if we did not really commend Prime Minister Cameron. He came here yesterday and he made a very important announcement about opening the registry of company ownership and trusts. Well, he did not mention trust, but I'm sure he meant that, but he forgot to. And no, that's a wonderful initiative. And those guys get a lot of flack from us. But when you occasionally do something right, I think we should join me and applaud Cameron for his courage, really.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of our session. Please join me in thanking the panelists. Oh, thank you. I think we're done.
Thank you, Lee. Mo, I think for you from the last couple of days to be able to have that strong independent voice overseeing the independent reporting mechanism is clearly a really important part of what we do and what we're about. Okay, so now on to the last of our bright spots. We've got Rafael Aristia from Chile.
Good morning. Good morning. As some of you probably remember, in February 2010, Chile was hit by a huge earthquake, one of the largest in record. And soon after, it was hit by a huge tsunami. And just 7 months later, we had to rescue 33 miners that were trapped underground for 70 days. In both cases, Chilean government had to act boldly. It took risks and it made quick decisions. And in both cases, we succeeded. So you see, when the government got itself into emergency mode, it really acted differently than it normally does. It got more focused, more collaborative, and much more agile. So a good question would be, what if government could always work like that? And if you think about it, it should. Because we don't have miners trapped every day, but we do have citizens that are trapped by government's bureaucracy and complexity, and that, as the miner did, don't have time to waste. Take, for example, Paola. She lives in the north of Chile, in Putre. In 2011, when she had to get a voucher for medical attention, she had to go to Arica, a port that is in a journey of close to 24 hours. Imagine the cost, the complexity of all that. But you know what? The most terrible thing is that there is a government office very close to Paola's house, but it is from a different agency, so she can use that. So the question would be, can we really shake the government to work as in the emergency mode for Paola? Or can we shake the government to work as if citizens really matter all the time, not just in emergencies? And I think the answer is yes. We have been doing so in Chile in the past couple of years. In January 2012, we launched Chile Atiende. This is our bright spot. Chile Atiende, it's a multi-channel network that offers citizen services to citizens. It is based in existing infrastructure. We didn't invest in new infrastructure, and it is run by the same people. It's just an initiative of coordination of institutions that through this network are delivering more than 160 services from more than 25 different agencies. Through Chile Atiende, citizens are saving more than 5 million hours a year. And most importantly, now Paola can get their services in their office close to her home, saving to her time to be used in whatever she wants. But more than the results, I would also like to share with you 3 things that for us have been very important in developing this initiative. The first is about people. We have been working with a lot of different people, but the right people in this initiative. It's hard to say it, but of course there are people in governments and in big institutions that want help in this. So we decided not to work with them. We decided to work with the guys that were willing to take risks and make decisions. And once the path was more clear, of course the other guys followed. So getting the right people, the right leaders, and getting them support has been very important for us. The second thing is about agility. The single most important thing to move government ahead for us has been to change the attitude that government cannot be changed. So moving fast and getting the sense that things can be changed has been so important. For us, and for that, we didn't start asking for budget or for a changing the rules. We just start moving. We did prototyping, we did pilot experiences with a focus on short-term results. And with that, we start overcoming the normal status quo. And the third thing is that in order to get different results, we had to try new things. We soon realized that, of course, we didn't have most of the answers that we needed, and we didn't have time to get them. So we started asking for the experts in citizen services. We asked the citizens. So we ran a lot of public consultation, and let me share one with you. We decided to get rid of a lot of paperwork in Chile Atiende. We didn't know where to start and how to push institutions. So we ran a public consultation, and within months we have over 100,000 people telling us what service should go online and why. And with that, we developed a plan that we're implementing now, and that we have online and the citizens can see and the media can see. So now we are looking and showing which institutions are moving ahead and which ones are lagging behind. And that really gets things moving. Finally, I would like to end with a story that shows how government is changing, because the single most important learning that we have had here is that really government can be changed, but it must be shaken, it must be stressed from within, because it's not in government's nature to do things differently. So this is Eliana and Eduardo. They are a couple that lives in the very far south of Chile, in the Aysén province, probably one of the most beautiful places of my country. They have been married for 50 years, and they've been working all their life in a small beekeeping business that was recently destroyed by disease. So when that happened, they decided to go to government and ask for a benefit. But instead of taking a trip of 10 hours to the closest city, as would be normal, they called Chile Atiende. And given their age, Chile Atiende personnel went to her home and delivered the service. So that is, for us, what a closed government looks like and what a modern government should be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rafael. And thank you to all the Bright Spot presenters. I think we've seen such a tremendous set of practical examples of the difference that people are making around the world. And certainly for me, it's been one of the highlights of this summit. We're shortly about to begin the all-important process of voting on these 7 Bright Spots. But before I do, I just wanted to remind us of what it is that we've seen. Yesterday, we began with Maria Novkovic from Montenegro with the new mobile app Be Responsible, which transforms citizens into vigilant reporters. We saw Arka Diratara from Indonesia, who described his work with Lapor, the mechanism for citizens to submit real-time feedback or complaints on public services. We saw Urmo Kubar from Estonia, who told us about the People's Assembly, a deliberative democracy tool to gather citizens' input on the legislative agenda. And we saw Christian Botan from Romania and his website to reduce the nepotism in public sector hiring. And then earlier today, we began with Vivienne Suete Cortez from the Philippines and their citizen audit of the budget for different areas of government. We saw Georgi Klidashvili from Georgia, who's using the OGP process to secure improvements in the Freedom of Information Act. And just now, Rafael and Chile Atiende, the one-stop online and offline service for public service delivery. Now, the process of voting, right? So you need to go to the link on the OGP website and vote from there, which is ogpsummit.org. Obviously, you can do it on your mobile devices if you have them, and but if you'd like to, there are the selection of iPads near the information point in the festival area on the 3rd floor, just by the lifts when you come out there. The voting opens now. I believe it will be open actually right now, and it closes at 2:30 this afternoon. So please go ahead and vote for the presentation and the example that you found to be truly inspiring, the most inspiring amongst a selection of fabulous stories. And with that, that brings us to the end of this first plenary session. We now go off and enjoy the rest of the day's activity. We've got our next plenary sessions are starting in a moment. And of course, we'll continue with all of the festival content on the 3rd floor and on the 5th floor. I hear in particular that the play that is going to begin at 11:30 this morning in our igloo has a potential to go off probably to the West End and Broadway and elsewhere. So I hear it's particularly a fabulous example. And after that and lunch and the other sessions, we'll be returning back to the plenary session here in the room with the session with our co-chairs and with the keynote speech from Sir Tim Berners-Lee. So a last reminder, that Twitter hashtag again, OGP13. And thank you very much. Have a really stimulating and really rewarding day, and thank you very much for coming to London.